It will also stay on Facebook. So if people do come in late, they can always go back to the conversation and see it later if they
I
missed it.
can't believe a bookstore is still around since 1896.
1896. I'm going to talk about that a little bit.
That's
Nancy
crazy.
Warwick, is that correct? Nancy Warwick is the 4th generation owner of this bookstore.
Wow.
And so we are not the oldest bookstore in the country, but we're the oldest continuously family owned bookstore. So her great great grandfather actually started this in Minnesota in 1896.
That's amazing.
And a lot of people think that it was like, oh, it was just mercantile or that. It's like, no, it was a bookstore. There were books in the store back in Minnesota in that time period.
Survivor, man. I mean, there are not many left.
Not, you know, we've got a little bit of a resurgence going on. But for those that don't know where Warwick's is, we are located now. I always say, I've said this at a few of the events before, is that he was a smart man in real estate and bought and came to La Jolla in the 30s. So we've been in the building that we're at since the 50s. So location. So
Amazing.
we're located.
I hope you do another 130.
That's our goal. We definitely are an institution and a legacy here in San Diego. So
I'm honored to be here.
We are honored to have you here for sure. And so I wanted to let everybody know, if you're not familiar with Warwick's, to during the shutdown that's happened, we're at a 20% capacity, but you can still come to the store. While we have a whole half of our store is books, we do have other things, gifts and jewelry and fine pens. So 'tis the holiday season, so there's lots of things. So we're keeping everybody safe, and we'd love to see everybody in the store if they're feeling comfortable to do that. But we will also be putting Michael's book into the comment section on Facebook. So it'll be very easy for you to click that and order the book, and you can either pick it up at the store or we can ship it to you. So I like to say, anywhere there is to get a book, you can get it from Warwick's. Tonight's conversation is going to be for about 35, 40-ish minutes between Michael and Melissa. There's a way for you as a viewer here on Facebook to participate. You can ask questions in the comment section. I'm not going to bring those in live. I'll bring those in after Michael and Melissa are done chatting. So I think we've given Facebook enough time to let everybody know we're here. So let's start this show off. So on behalf of Warwick's and our partners on this event, the Coronado Public Library and the San Diego Tijuana Smart Border Coalition, I'd like to first officially welcome you, Michael and Melissa, to be here tonight.
It's great to be here. It's an honor. An institution.
Yeah, it is an institution. So a little bit about Michael. So Michael S. Malone is one of the nation's best known technology writers. A former New York Times columnist, Michael has also contributed numerous articles and editorials to the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and Fortune. He has also authored and co-authored more than a dozen books. He holds an MBA from Santa Clara University, is an honorary fellow of the Said Business School at Oxford University, and is a distinguished friend of Oxford University. Michael's here tonight to discuss his new book, El TERCER PAIS? Is that PAIS? The Third Country, San Diego and Tijuana, 2 countries, 2 cities, 1 community. With him this evening is Melissa Floca. She is the program officer for cross-border initiatives at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, Kroc IPJ, at the University of San Diego's Kroc School. I was telling Melissa in the green room, we've done a lot of events at that theater. It's a beautiful theater. So hopefully we get out of this COVID and Warwick's can come back and maybe you two can have a conversation there live one of these days. In her role, she develops and oversees the portfolio of activities focused on creating a peaceful and inclusive border region. Prior to joining Kroc IPJ, Melissa spent 8 years at UC San Diego, where she worked with the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies, Mexican Migration Field Research Program, and the Border Solutions Alliance on issues of innovation, education, workforce development, and economic competitiveness. Before moving to the border region, she worked at the Mexico City-based office of McKinsey & Company, serving clients on projects related to financial inclusion, public health, and low-income housing. She holds a BA in political science and economics from Johns Hopkins University and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Melissa sits on the International Affairs Board of the City of San Diego and the Board of Directors of Create Purpose. Welcome and have a great conversation, you two.
I was going to say, hang on to your seats, folks. So Melissa and I had a brief conversation that turned into an hour-and-a-half argument.
I love it. Well, I might, when I pop in, I might have to put up cut you guys off.
That wasn't an argument, Michael. That was just a friendly exchange of ideas.
Yes, that's what it was.
Well, thank you, Julie, for that really generous introduction. And thank you, Michael, for writing this wonderful book. El Tercer País, it's a gift to our region. And when I read it, it made me think of one of my favorite passages from Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens, where he talks about how it's the stories that humans tell that animate all important collaborations. And I think the narrative you have created about the San Diego-Tijuana cross-border metropolis, well, it's a story of the power of building trust and a call for future cooperation. And so, as someone from the north of California and who's written about things all around the world, did you know that this was the book you were going to write when you started the project?
I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. I'm a NorCal technology business writer, and I've been doing it for my whole life. But out of the blue, I was contacted by Silicon Valley Press, and they had a book they wanted to do with Malone Burnham. Now, shows you how ignorant I was. I mean, everybody in San Diego probably knows who Malone Burnham is. If you don't, just look on the names of all the buildings around UC San Diego and everywhere else, the Yacht Harbor. Anyway, Malone wanted to write a book, and they suggested I get a hold of him and work with him to help him write his book. Well, he enjoyed the experience so much, he actually put my name on the cover, which I never do for other people's books. But we got along so well that he came back a year and a half later and said, I want to have somebody write the story of the border and what's been done between these two great cities of San Diego and Tijuana after 225 years. You know, what's been accomplished in the last 30. You know, I'm an old newspaper man. I'm a fourth generation newspaper man. I sensed a good story there. And my only requirement was, yeah, I'll write this book, but I have to, I have complete editorial control. Nobody can touch a word. This is mine, because I decided the story was good enough. I wanted this to be my book, not somebody else's book. So I had to own it completely. And then I just went down as a reporter. And this was not the book even then I set out to do. I was going to write a 50,000 word book about the last 30 years in border relations. And as I got deeper and I realized this incredible history of these two cities banging against each other, working together, fighting each other, it was such an incredible story that I realized I had to start with the mission. Well, that's kind of going back a ways. And there was no way to keep from turning this 50,000 word book into what it turned out to be, which was a 130,000 word book. But I had made, I won't say it was a mistake, but I had kind of overstepped myself because one of the first people I met in researching this was Jose Gallico down in Tijuana. And I had a 93-year-old man asking me to do the book, and now I'm at lunch with a, whatever he is, 85-year-old man, two very persuasive individuals. And Pepe Gallico said, I want this book for Innovadora next year. And I thought, well, okay. And he said, you have to promise me it'll be there. Book will be done. And being a classic journalist, I thought, well, that's a year and 4 months away. That's forever. I don't have to worry about it. But then I started backtracking publication times, printing times, and all that. And I realized I had 5 months to write this book, and it was growing, right in front of me. I managed to make it. I don't think I saw much daylight for about 5 months, but I did it. I got it to Pepe Gallico in time. It was the centerpiece of Innovadora, and now it's finally being published in English and hardcover and all that. So it was an interesting year.
Well, I know a lot of those folks who you interviewed, and none of them are short on words when it comes to talking about the region. So I'm sure you had very rich interviews with everyone. And I wish you could have written this book a decade ago. It would have saved me a lot of time. When I came to San Diego about 8 years ago, I had no idea. I mean, similar to you coming down, I didn't know what the region was like. I remember really vividly when I interviewed for my job at the Center for U.S. Mexican Studies that I stayed at a hotel in Mission Bay, and the waiter at breakfast one morning was telling me that he commuted up to work from Tijuana, and that when he was a kid, the border was a barbed wire fence, and it was, it wasn't a barrier, it was just a marker. And, when I look back on that conversation, I just think about all the things that I didn't understand about the region. And you've really, I think, encapsulated that history of change, the stories of people and how they live on both sides of the border in your writing. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that process, the people that you interviewed, your perspective as an outsider from the region. Can you tell me about that?
Well, one thing that's crucial was I had a whole lot of help. I mean, I couldn't have done it that fast and that long. Malone opened every door he could on both sides of the border. I had Gallico doing the same thing. I had Alan Burson, the former border czar, and he really was my Virgil, taking me through all of the events that occurred in changing the nature of the border and the, law enforcement and everything else. And then I had James Clark, who's very much involved in Border Coalition and all of that. And he gave me a lot of cultural stuff. And in fact, he gave me the name for the book. Because I was talking to him one day and I said, there's something arising here in this border area, for a few blocks each way, from the retail mall, America's retail mall in San Diego, down to the plaza in Tijuana, just a quarter mile. But there's like a different culture developing. It's a hybrid. Something unusual and special is emerging here. And he said, well, people have called it El Tercer País, the third country. Right? That's the title of the book. I love it. So thanks to James. And I should also, there's another name that appears on the cover of the book. It says with Cheryl Dumesnil, because she's the one that had to do some of the real heavy lifting interviews that went on for 3 hours, because I was hunched over a hot keyboard trying to pound out my, 3,000 words of the day. So she really provided a lot of insight. So all these people, got so into doing this book because, like you said, there really wasn't any precedent. I mean, there's a couple good books about San Diego history. There's one book I found about Tijuana, but you talk to people who grew up in Tijuana and they say, well, yeah, we learned a little bit about our history in 3rd grade, but we really don't know much about our past. And so I was astonished. And so that was another reason to write this, wide-ranging, horizontal history from beginning and really tell Tijuana's story, but also retell the San Diego story in regards to its interaction with the other side of the border.
It strikes me, Michael, that the fate of regions, of city regions, is often a kind of a combination of global forces and local leadership. And you really give us a fascinating glimpse in your book into the backstories of the civic leaders who created organizations like the San Diego Dialogue and Tijuana Innovadora and the Smart Border Coalition. But the public sector is not really a main actor in your story, and I'd like to hear what thoughts you have on what it will take for elected leaders to leverage this fantastic cross-border ecosystem that you describe.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised to find that the history was sort of bimodal. You have national figures like Burson, and you also have international trade coming in, which helped drive the maquiladora movement down there, because the U.S. companies needed inexpensive manufacturing to be able to deal with that trade. But most of the story really begins at grassroots. I mean, individual people crossing the border, like that waiter you had, who's living on both sides. And we have mothers middle-class mothers in Tijuana who are sending their kids, a long tradition of multiple generations, to San Diego to go to school. And the moms come up to pick up their kid after school or after soccer practice or something like that. And they end up talking with the moms of the San Diego kids, and they get to know each other. And one of them just happens to be a powerful figure at UC San Diego. And connections start getting made at the very, very much the personal level. And then finally, you have just economic destiny. I mean, these two giant cities, Tijuana was a ranch until about 1890, while San Diego had the Del Coronado and everything else. It was a thriving metropolis. But throughout the 20th century, Tijuana just grew like topsy. Until now, it may actually be bigger in population than San Diego. San Diego's also getting older. With all the retirees, all those Navy veterans, retiring down there. Tijuana is young and it's got a lot of energy. So it's sort of inevitable that they would have to interact. They share the Tijuana River, which is crucial, and sewage up on the coast, and the same weather. And they're both ignored by their capital cities. When I talked about Mexico City to Tijuana, they didn't spit on the ground, but they sort of said they don't like us. They don't care about us. They pretend we're not here because we're in the corner of the country. Well, I spent enough time in my life in San Diego to know that San Diegans kind of feel the same way about Washington, D.C., ignoring them because they're in the corner of the country. And San Diego had the other burden of being the baby brother of LA. San Diego didn't come out from underneath LA until World War II, frankly. So both cities have kind of an inferiority complex, but they also have enormous pride in themselves. And as people began to interact more and more at all levels, it just became inevitable that the two cities were not going to be able to pretend the other one didn't exist. They had to start working together. And the miracle is how quickly it's happened, 30 years, and how far it's gone. It's extraordinary, the interaction between business leaders and private citizens in those two towns. And I think somebody asked me what the recipe is for other cities. And I said, go out and find two octogenarians and nonagenarian who are really powerful and have them become close friends. Because I think Gallico and Burnham are absolutely crucial to the process. You need those kinds of people that everybody looks up to. They say, well, if they're working together, then there's no reason we can't.
So Michael, now I want to push you a little bit.
Okay.
Earlier this year, we were on a book panel together with Alan Burson at the San Diego Festival of Books with another author, D.W. Gibson, who's the author of 14 Miles, Building the Border Wall. And both of those books are about our region, but 14 Miles is basically the exact opposite of the bright story of growth and innovation and civic leadership that you tell in El Tercer País. And so, our region, it is this innovation and manufacturing powerhouse perched at the gateway of Latin America and the US West Coast and Asia. But it's an uncomfortable truth that both cities suffer from tremendous inequality, and Tijuana tops the list of cities with the highest homicide rate in the world. And so, the best analogy that I can think of to explain this duality is, the black and white drawing where some people see a young woman with her head turned and other people see the nose of a sort of an old hag. I think your book might only see that young woman, and DW's book might only see the old crone. But for many of us here who live on the border, we see both of those pictures, and it can be very hard to reconcile one with the other as a citizen of this region. And what do you do with that complexity and with the fact that both of those things are true about our region and our cities?
Well, I like your analogy because in a sense, I was trying to create a Gestalt switch in the reader's mind and it was one that I went through researching this book. First time I was in Tijuana was in 1962, I think. And I operated, and in every decade since then, I've been down there. I've been to San Diego a lot, conferences and everything else. And I was struck by how what I encountered in Tijuana, for all of its problems, was completely different. It was the antithesis of most of the prejudices and stereotypes I had about that city. And I think for most Americans, and a shocking number of San Diegans who have never, 40% have never been to Mexico. I mean, how is that even possible?
Wait times are long.
Yeah, I mean, they still have those stereotypes. They still have those prejudices. And what I encountered in San Diego, you talk about income inequality, but what I saw in the 60s was rich San Diego, poor Tijuana. I mean, the inequality went across the border. Now, there remains inequality, but a lot of that wealth has now flowed to Tijuana. It has developed its own powerful economic infrastructure, and it's rising fast. And will that tide lift all boats? Probably not, but it's going to lift a lot. A lot of people are already living. I mean, you compare their existence that they had in Costa Rica or the highlands of central Mexico. They come to Tijuana, they're working in Maquiladora, they're getting an education. Are they getting wealthy as Americans? Not yet, but you can see the trajectory. So yes, still income inequality. Crime is interesting in Tijuana because 30 years ago you went down there, the crime was in the middle of the city. 15 years ago you went down there, they were running gun battles in downtown. Now you go down there and they carved the center out into a kind of a nice zone. I mean, it's pretty safe. I think I felt safer in downtown Tijuana than I did in downtown Detroit or downtown Philly. So it's got that. It's still got all that crime, all those murders, all those drug wars going on in the outer district. But at least it's staked a place, staked out an area that it can be expanded as law enforcement gets better. So is it fixed in Tijuana? Hell no. But it's got that trajectory again. That's why I'm optimistic. Everything I saw in Tijuana seemed to me getting better. And that gave me hope. And that all of my stereotypes were exploding. The idea that, people do craft work in Mexico and people do high-tech work in big-time manufacturing in the US. And I went and looked at Taylor Guitar. And Taylor Guitar, where do they do their high-tech manufacturing? Mexicali. Okay, where do they do their craft work? San Diego. What the hell's going on? This is upside down. I see doctors heading down from Chula Vista to go to work in the medical tourism, the greatest in the world right now in Tijuana. Okay, they're doing that 2-3 days a week. Why? Because medical care is cheaper there, but it's superior in many ways to all the great hospitals and all that on the US side. Everything seems to be backwards. I want a beer. You go to Mexico because Mexico had all the good beer. Now we have craft beer in San Diego. You want good wine? Well, you don't go to California, Southern California. You go down to the valley south of Tijuana. Things are reversing. And that's interesting to me.
Michael, if you really want to start a fight, those are fighting words about whether it's San Diego or Tijuana that has the best craft beer. There are a lot of Tijuanenses that'll really fight you on that one.
Well, they'll be happy though when I say if I want really good, interesting, gourmet, cutting-edge cuisine, I'm going to go to Tijuana. No question about it. They're creating one of the world's great cuisines down there right now. So part of the point of the book was to explode all these myths and to upturn all these prejudices. And I was the test case. I was testing myself. Is this what I think really true? And it turns out in most cases, I was wrong. And I think the perception of most Americans is wrong about the border. I expect to go down there and see the giant wall, the fence, and it was, kind of like a World War I no man's land. And I get down there and there's like a J. Crew store butted up against the fence on the American side. And there's 100,000 square foot, Nissan factory, Datsun factory on the other side in Tijuana. I'm going, well, where's the fence? And you could just sort of make it out. And then I talked to some of the general managers at the Maquiladora, and I said, how do you feel about the the immigrants coming north from Central America? And they didn't come out and say, well, we're kind of glad the wall's here, but they did come out and say, we wish they'd stay in Tijuana, because we need people, and we'll hire them, we'll train them, we'll give them a decent living, we'll educate them, they can get married in the cafeteria. I didn't expect that answer. I mean, I feel like I've been looking at a newsreel from the 40s and still thinking that's how the world works when it regards to Tijuana. And my eyes were absolutely opened by the experience. And that's the story I wanted to tell.
Well, I agree with your optimism, and for many of us who live here in the region, we live these stories every day, and they're true, and they are very different from the perceptions that people outside of the region or even inside of the region have about the relationship between the two cities. I think the local discourse on issues like trade, for example, has not matched the national discourse on those issues in any way. And
I think being ignored and people not understanding entirely what you're doing has actually been a very good thing up till now, because nobody's interfered with the process. And this has become, I'm really convinced now, looking at this, and especially at this third country, and it's changing mores and customs and all of that, that this is a crucible for international relations in the rest of the world. There's a lot of countries that have cities bumping into each other at the border, including a number in US along both borders, that you all are figuring out how to not only make it work, but actually thrive from it. That I think you're creating something fundamentally new. And I think the process has just begun. When I talked to all these people on the book, every one of them said, look, we're getting older. We're the last generation. We've got to keep this going. We've got to keep evolving this and developing it. We can't step backwards. We've got to control crime in Tijuana because it threatens the situation. We've got to keep the border open as best we can. And the COVID lockdown was interesting because first the US lockdown said you can't come up from Mexico. Then the numbers flip-flopped, and now Mexico said, we're shutting down the border. You can't come in, So, but they did their damnedest to keep working together. And the cross-border coalition has been working together for a number of years. There's a number of initiatives. You talked about the public sector. They're still way behind. They still haven't caught up, but they're being forced to. When you can't land at a runway, you only have one runway in San Diego at the airport, and you want to grow, you've got to go somewhere. So what do? You vault the wall, and you go to the Tijuana airport, which has multiple runways. Well, I'm not sure any public official in San Diego wanted that to happen, but when it did, they're happy it did, So they're being kind of dragged and screamed into it. There's a lot more power on both sides of the wall to talk about, the bad folks on the other side, and we got to take care of ourselves and all of that, and the threats. But in fact, there's this sort of mutual understanding that's going on and growing, and it has enormous potential. I really, in the worst of all possible worlds, crime gets so bad in Tijuana that nobody wants to go there. The alternative, the other bad scenario is we have an economic downturn in the United States, and U.S. companies in San Diego and elsewhere have a recession, and they start shutting down the Maquiladoras down there. That would be disastrous. Short of that, the best case scenario, I think, is the two cities, they're now touching each other essentially, begin to work together on super sovereign activities like a regional government dealing with the issues like the river and pollution and cross-border traffic and all of those things. I think that's in the works within the next 10 years. I mean, can you imagine citizens of both cities voting for this super sovereign council that handles this stuff? That'd be the first in the world. I was talking to Malone and Alan Burson on the phone, and they're talking about ideas and throwing them out. And I mentioned line houses on the U.S.-Canadian border. There's actually buildings that are on both sides of the border that you walk through the building and you cross the border. There's a library. It's been there since like 1899 or something, about as long as Warwick's has been around. And but you can cross the border inside that building. And I threw it out, and I assumed they'd say, well, we have so many challenges before we could ever get to something like that. And Alan Burson, the former border czar, said, actually, that's achievable. It can be done under current regulations. So imagine a giant building straddling the border. And you go in one side, you show your passport. As long as you stay in the building, you can go into the United States. You just can't go out the US door, vice versa. And so you come in and you leave out the same door, but in between, family reunions, weddings, everything else. You don't have to go down to the park by the beach, and reach through to touch your relatives and hold a wedding that way. You'd actually be able to gather together in one physical place beyond the border. That's an exciting concept. I think it's a kind of 21st century thinking that only San Diego and Tijuana are doing right now.
Oh, Michael, but you could also just take the wall down and let people go back and forth and see their family and go to weddings and go to meetings. And I think,
hell yes, you can. But I'm being practical here, and it's very possible this administration will go in and tear it all down. If that happens, great. But considering political realities and opinions in the US and all that, I'm assuming the fence is going to be there for a while. So is there anything we can do to make it superfluous, to calm the fears of Americans of hordes of poor immigrants streaming across the border again and putting up the signs with the families, caution signs of families running across the freeway and all that? Not have that, but at the same time have that border porous. Not have this ugly black thing standing there as a reminder of the tension between the two countries that goes all the way back to the Mexican War.
I think as a region, I mean, our federal governments are real, and federal policy is real, and we make a lot of strides here locally to making things work. But I think we have to push as well. And one of the things that these groups of civic leaders can do is help people really think big, bigger than wedding venues, shared wedding venues on the border. And I think we should ask ourselves as a region, why are we so excited about the free movement of goods and capital? Why do we put all this infrastructure in place for avocados and car parts? And we have international treaties, we have import-export banks, we have billions of dollars of border infrastructure, but people live here too. And when an 8th grader leaves school in San Diego and shows up at school to enroll in Tijuana because their family is a cross-border family, we don't have anything in place for those kids. We don't have the same kinds of policies or groups like the Smart Border Coalition who are working on those issues. And I can't imagine us having a competitive cross-border region 50 years from now if we don't get serious about those kinds of challenges and about thinking more creatively about them.
Well, I agree. I think it's going to take a lot of experimentation. There's going to be some failures. I also think there are certain things that you guys should be doing where you don't ask permission from the federal government, because that process is forever. Just make it a fait accompli, have a precedent set, and let them tell you can't do it anymore. It's not going to happen, and I really think that commerce oftentimes precedes, it's strange, but commerce precedes culture sometimes. That if you guys ever build that damn train you've been wanting to build for 120 years, so you don't depend upon trucks all the time, it's going to have to bounce back because of topography. It's going to have to bounce back and forth across the border to get from Arizona and points beyond. Well, that's going to set precedents too. If you're on a train and they're not going to look for your passport every time you cross a riverbed, heading from, Flagstaff to San Diego. So that's going to be, in a sense, a precedent that you're allowed to do that. We're doing fast pass now, across the border to speed things up. It's an acknowledgement that we really can't live down there without that speed. We're opening a new border crossing. It's forcing the situation. And I like that. And I like the experimentation. I like trying out new institutions that tie the two cities together. Because if the two cities become de facto sister cities, the economic power of the San Diego, Tijuana region right there becomes as big as anywhere in the US. I mean, it becomes a major international economic powerhouse. And I think that's, if nothing gets in the way, I think that's where it ends up. And that's a marvelous thing.
You mentioned the younger generations, and that's something that gives me a lot of hope for our region. I think that school age kids and young professionals in their 20s and 30s, they experience the cross-border region very differently than the people who you interviewed in your book. And part of that is because change has happened so quickly. And so they've grown up in a region where, they go back and forth all the time. People they know live on both borders. And a couple of years ago, we did a survey of about 5,000 9th and 10th graders in schools in San Diego and Tijuana. And about a third of them, said that they see themselves living on both sides of the border when they grow up, and that they consider themselves from both sides of the border. And that's, not a question of citizenship. That's a question of identity. These are young people who think of themselves as a product of this binational region that your book explains how it developed and how it came to be. And now, because of that, you have young people, lots of young people, not a couple here and there, but just sort of the norm for many, many young people in our region as understanding themselves as part of this TERCER PAIS, of the title of your book.
Yeah, well, it's like the Israelites crossing the Jordan. The old people couldn't come across to the promised land. And I covered it as a magazine editor up here. The younger generation, their adoption of computer technology almost occurred in the womb. So a kid who's 10 years old right now has never known a world without TikTok and everything else. It's internalized in them. For us old folks like me, it's something that's been adopted, it's been grafted on. So the crucial thing, as long as we keep this moving, these kids are assimilating this as the new reality. And, that's a marvelous thing. And there's no reason it won't keep going. I mean, TV has helped. I mean, the internet has helped that you sit in a hotel in Tijuana and watch American television, and you can sit in a bar in San Diego and watch, Mexican television. I mean, this is going cross. I found it, another stereotype I had was that everything's cheaper in Mexico. Then I go down to Las Americas, outlet mall, and everybody in there is Mexican. Everybody has come over from Tijuana. Why are you here? Everything's cheaper down there. And said, no, it's not. Big time, big label retail goods are cheaper in America. So we come over here for the cheap goods. Well, you couldn't even imagine somebody saying that 30, 40 years ago, that they come to America because it's less expensive. And I know growing number of people, even up here in Northern California, because Silicon Valley is the most expensive place on earth, essentially. And, you bought your house for $14,000. It's now worth $2.5 million. You can't live here anymore after a certain age. So you sell out. Where do you go? To the rain in Oregon? No. You go south to Tijuana, you go down to Ensenada, you go along the beach, you move down there. You got better, cheaper medical care down there, and you can get across the border quickly. I'm seeing a lot of this migration both ways. And it's really interesting, this cross mixing. And inevitably out of that is going to come some hybridized culture, even changing language and lifestyle and all of those things. It's happening already. You know, everybody I saw from Mexico in the mall all had American t-shirts on, you know, and American baseball teams and football teams and all of that. And there we go. It's begun. It's been going for a decade now or two. It's going to keep going. It's going to come to the point that you're not going to know what side of the border the people you encountered in that third country are from. And they may be from both.
If 2020 has taught me anything, it's that this is likely to be a complex and challenging decade. And I think you do a beautiful job of describing the development of social trust. You help us think about how we can use that trust to be resilient and forward-looking and think about the next chapter for our region. So thank you for giving us this book as a jumping off point.
Oh, my pleasure. I really, you know, there's several things in the end I wanted to have happen. One of them was to give the citizens of Tijuana, especially the students, their past. And I wanted also to show that this is a history of trust, that San Diego looked down on Tijuana and says a dangerous, dirty place. And Tijuana said, look at those Americans. They keep shipping all of their sins to us. Then they blame us for being sinful. And it took 200 years to overcome that mistrust. But now it's there. Now we're here. It's going to be interesting to see what comes after the quarantine lifts, just how fast these two cities take off again together.
It's amazing. Great conversation, you two. Thank you.
Oh, we didn't throw any punches.
Can't wait. No punches were thrown, although you almost started a beer war. There were some comments in the section that was talking about beer. So you did almost start the beer war. And then Melissa, I wasn't sure if you talked or if you can talk a little bit about the San Diego Tijuana Smart Border Coalition. Did you guys get into that at all? About what they're doing?
We didn't really much, but I do think it's important to point out what an important force the Smart Border Coalition has been in our region, along with lots of other organizations of civic leaders and business leaders who really have come together around these issues and helped us create the narratives that we use to talk about our region and about the things that are unique and about the challenges that we have, and much of what Michael has written about wouldn't have happened without that leadership.
Yeah, I mentioned that so much of this was a grassroots effort, but part of it was an academic effort out of San Diego State and UC San Diego, looking at the border and all that, and it grew. And as this trust grew, I think the trust has become institutionalized, which is great. That now people from both sides of the border meet at like the Smart Border Coalition and they talk, you know, and they're friends and they interact in their social lives. And I think that is just as important as any law or regulation in terms of bringing these two communities together.
I'm thinking that this needs to be one of those books that San Diego has a one book, one San. It's like everybody needs to read this book in San Diego, and it's like, how do we get that to happen? Because it's so important, and it's such a great narrative, and from, like you said, the grassroots of people who live here and who have built up the city and who want this to be a positive thing. So we got to get this book in everybody's hands.
Well, that's your job.
I know. It's like, how do I get this done? I got to figure out how to, like, every book club needs to like pick this as their book club choice for 2021. I think that might be something that we start with.
Well, I have to say, you know, it was a real pleasure. I'd always dipped into, my entire life, I've dipped into both cities, but to fully immerse myself in it and talk to the people that had really been influential was eye-opening and very uplifting. I mean, I came away from this incredibly optimistic, and I'm a cynical old ink in the blood newspaper man. I look at the dark side, and I couldn't find, there's a lot of dark side, but I found a whole bunch of light that gave me a lot of hope.
Well, and I think the thing is I think it's human nature that people always seem to want to exacerbate the fear of everything, and they want to look at the bad things. And so it's really hard to put that positive message out there. I mean, but it's all of our jobs, us booksellers and everybody, to like make sure that that positive message keeps being hammered home. And
well, tell Melissa, I tried to be cynical all through this. I mean, I tried to be, hard nosed, but boy, I've been an investigative reporter covering, crime and espionage and drugs and all of that. And my spidey sense as a newsie just lit up that this was a great positive story.
But that lends it to the credibility. And that lends to the credibility of what you're putting forth here, is that you did come at it with a very cynical view. And I think that is, especially for people, I've got my grays covered, but especially for our gray hairs that, that we're a little bit less, pliable in our thinking. And so coming at it from your point is really
important. If nothing else, after you read the book, just go down to the border and look around and see if it's what you assumed it was.
Right.
And I think you'll be surprised.
Well, that was one of the comments that came in from, I want to see here. Mark said, ironically, it's often U.S. citizens in faraway states who are the most fearful of opening the border.
Oh, yeah. I talked to a very successful young guy, retailer, and he said, I was in the UK a couple months ago, and I was talking to people, and they said, you have a very interesting accent. Where are you from? And he said, Mexico. And they said, oh, I've always wanted to go to Mexico. It sounds like a really interesting country. Where in Mexico? And he said, Tijuana. And they went, oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Are you safe there? That's the attitude. That's what they have to rise above.
Yep. And that's what and all of us need to lift that voice up. And by doing things like this and, carrying the book in our bookstore and spreading the word as best we can. So with that, Melissa, very quickly, is there, do you do social media? Do you do a website? Is there, if people want to follow what you're thinking, do you do anything like that?
That's my New Year's resolution for 2021. I don't, but I should.
Okay. Well, we'll look for the future for that. And Michael, do you have a website or anything that you want to tell people about?
Oh, I have a LinkedIn, Michael S. Malone. There's a Facebook for the book.
Okay.
But unless you care about Silicon Valley, I mean, I do a podcast every Friday that goes around the world but that's for people interested in technology. So,
well, I think that Gustavo put a link to the Smart Border Coalition. So that's maybe where people need to go to follow this and follow stories on.
They just put up Gustavo just put up a cool new video.
Yeah. And so I think that's where we're going to direct people that want more information about this topic. Head to that link that Gustavo put in the comment section. It was a pleasure hosting both of you this evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thanks to the audience for sitting through this.
Yep.
I appreciate it. I'm honored.
It was fantastic. Melissa, thank you for your time preparing too. And so with that, I'm going to say good night to Facebook.
It's the first time I've done an interview with a bookstore that's existed in 3 different centuries.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes. It's incredible.
And we're going to keep that legacy going. So everybody out there, if you're going to buy books this holiday season, Warwick's is the place to go. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.